Hi everyone, and welcome to Demo 1 of the Backend lectures. My name is Elena, your co-instructor for this fall. Alicia is the other co-instructor and she's making lecture 1, so you are stuck with me for Demo 1. So let's get started. I've opened up my terminal here, so I'm using ZSH shell, but you can use bash. If you don't know what that means, that's also fine. You can just search terminal if you have a Mac, or if you're on Windows, command prompt works too. So I am currently where my starter code is. So you should have downloaded a starter code, just a zip file on Piazza. You should probably name it SRC though, not starter. I have a starter so I can differentiate between the solution code. So you should keep the name as SRC. So if you notice, we gave you guys an app.py and requirements.txt. If you cat the requirements.txt, you see it's just like a bunch of packages and their versions. So don't worry about it's dangerous and like Jinja 2 and markup save. Those are just the basic packages that all requirements.txt have for Python. Just notice that we have a Flask that's 1.0.2. This is what we will be using to get started in our backend demo. So if you installed VS Code and basically followed the instructions, you're good to go in terms of opening up your code in a good environment. And from now on, I'm going to be using the terminal in VS Code so that there's no like tabbing back and forth. I did that last semester and I think it confused people. So let's just use the terminal here. And the way you can open this is if you go up in VS Code and you click terminal and then new terminal. And you can like add more terminals however much you want, but you can like go between them. So let's just stay in this one terminal, which is going to be very nice. Okay, so we will be writing code in our app.py. So this is a Python file. Congrats to everyone who passed the pre-test. The reason why we had that was because we will be doing stuff in Python, and we only have one other TA this semester, which is kind of a yikes. So we just wanted to limit the class size. Usually we have about like 100 plus students, but thanks to the pre-test we have, I think, a little less than that, like maybe 60 students. But I'm making this video on September 17th, so things might change. Anyway, hopefully you guys are well versed in Python. Not everyone will know how to do virtual environments, so I will go over that right now. So that's where requirements.txt comes in hand. But before we do that, let's pip install Virtual M. So Virtual M is a package that lets you create this isolated environment that you can activate and deactivate whenever you want to work on a specific project. The reason why this is important is because let's say you're working on CS 11.10 stuff, but you're using Python 3.5, and then for this backend course, you're using Python 3.7.6. So your Python packages could get confused, and it's a big deal if you're using the difference between like a Python 2 and Python 3. So we want to keep stuff isolated. So whenever you want to work on the backend course, here's what you do. So the first time you create a virtual environment, you do this. So I typed venv because that's the name of the folder that I want. So traditionally, that's what you name it. I wouldn't recommend naming it anything else. If you add spaces in your virtual environment name, you will have issues, I guarantee that. So just follow the norm and call this venv, and you only need one of this folder. This is the only time you'll be running this command. Unless you're creating a new project, which I would say happens if you download new starter code and we have like new packages, so that is a good scenario where you would do this again. Alright, so let's actually load in the packages that we have from requirements.txt and pipe it into our virtual environment. So we have to first activate it. So this is this command. So now that I've activated my environment, let's install the packages. So that's pip install -r requirements.txt. The order of install and -r are important because -r is like a tag. A flag to the command, so make sure you have that. If you are having issues with like pip in Python, it might be because your Python version is not right. So we have a page on the backend textbook that you can look at, and I will probably link in the Piazza post next to the starter code. Alright, so now that we have our stuff in, I think one thing that you can do to help you memorize this command is you can actually go into the virtual environment. It's because it's really just a folder, and you can go into the bin, and then you'll see we have all these packages. So we have Python and pip and easy install and Flask most importantly. So Flask is what you got after you piped in requirements.txt. Awesome. So let's go back to wherever our code is and we can start coding in our virtual environment. So once you stop working in your backend stuff, you can deactivate your virtual environment. So you just do that. And then every time you want to work on stuff again, you do this. It will make sense later on why we have this, but for now, just follow the video. And you guys are lucky because in past semesters, we've just glossed over this, and I type like really fast in classes, like live, and people have complained to me that they never got the virtual environment stuff. So here it is. Hopefully it stays here forever and you guys can use it and reference it whenever you want. Okay, so let's start writing code. So if you watch Alicia's lecture 1 video, you'll know that a backend is basically having routes that responds or serves data back to the client when they make requests. So let's just try to even run what we have right now. What you can do is just do python app.py. And then you'll see that your Flask app is running. So Flask is a framework that we're using to help us to be like that middleman of receiving the client's request and directing it to a specific endpoint that we write code to. So let's say you want to hit www.google.com. The server will serve up that all the data that you need for google.com, but Flask will technically be the guy that handles, okay, at this endpoint I want this code to run, and at that endpoint I want that code to run. So hopefully that gives you guys some intuition. Okay, so it says that our server is running here. So 0.0.0.0 is localhost. It's the same thing as 127.0.0.1. They're all the same thing. You can also type the words localhost. What this means is that you are currently hosting a server on your local computer. So what we can do is go to Safari. Let me open that up. Okay, so we can go to Safari and we can go to this endpoint and we can see that we've hit hello world, and that makes sense because we said that at this route with just a trailing backslash that our server will serve the string hello world. Great, so our server can run. So one thing that I want to show you guys after I mention this is the localhost thing. So none of you guys will be confused about this when the time comes. So you can literally type localhost and that will still work. You can type 1 point, I think this will work. If it doesn't work, I'll be confused. Yeah, so that works. That's also localhost. And the reason why it's on localhost is because we've declared it here in our code. So the app is currently running on our local computer and on port 5000. So a server can have multiple ports open, so we're just, by standard practice, we're just doing port 5000. So if you change this, remember you'll be hitting a different endpoint. Debug equals true just means that if we print like, hi, I'm debugging, then if I hit my endpoint here, so I just press enter, then my print statements will show up. So that's what debug equals true means. I wouldn't recommend changing any of that. So whatever we have here, just keep it. That's the best thing that happens. Okay, so if you noticed, I press save and then I change some code and the server automatically reacts to that. So whatever changes you make, the server will respond live unless you make an error. So if you try to parse, I don't know, like a string that's, or sorry, if you like divide by 0, for example, the server will just end. So you can end the server yourself by doing Control-C and the server will end now. So without this, we can code quietly or without disturbances. So hopefully that's less annoying. Okay, let's start off with creating a task-related backend. What this means is, so let's say you have like a to-do list, but we're gonna call it a task list, and each to-do is a task. So we want to be able to keep track of all the things we have to do and then be able to mark them if we finish them or not with a Boolean field. So let's first create our quote-unquote database. So this is going to be a bit lame, but hopefully it will give you guys a better understanding than if we just jump straight right into databases. So before we do that, let's import some packages. So let's import JSON. So if you watch the lecture video, JSON is the data format that we use to communicate with clients. So clients will send us a post request, that's a JSON payload, and we will respond with a JSON post response or JSON response. If they send us a GET request, then we'll respond JSON. Practically anytime we respond JSON. So JSON is your friend. Okay. Another thing that we want to import is request. This will help you parse whatever the client sends you, and you'll see how that works later. So let's start off with creating our quote-unquote database. So we're going to mock that by using Python dictionaries. So each key is going to be the ID of our task, and it's going to be a bit redundant because we're doing it in such a constricted manner because we're just mocking our database, but just stay with me. Okay, so the first task I have to do is my laundry, and I procrastinate a lot, so that's going to be false. Also, just a caveat, Booleans in Python have an uppercase first letter and JSON does not, so if you ever try to make requests and something's not working, just make sure you have that. Okay, and then let's make another task with ID of 1. And then my description is going to be, I have to do homework, and the done is false. Great, so I have my database called tasks, and I have 2 items. 1, I have to do laundry, and 1, I have to do homework, and I have not done either. Let's also keep track of what next task's ID will be when it will be newly added. So because we already have task 0 and 1, the next task ID will be 2. So again, this is very contrived, but it, trust me, will help you understand stuff because it's so simple. Okay, so we have this hello world endpoint. Let's just move on from this and pretend it doesn't exist. So let's create a brand new endpoint. So that's just app.route, and let's direct it to this endpoint task. So I want to get all of the tasks I have in my database. And let's just name our function tasks. So you can name your function anything, just make sure that it intuitively makes sense. If my client hits this endpoint, then I want to give them all the tasks. And so whenever we want to return a response, it has to be JSON, right? So the traditional format is to have a success key and the data key. And in success, you return a Boolean on whether or not your response was successful, and the data is the actual data that you want to give to the client. So let's get all of the tasks. So how do we convert this Python dictionary to a JSON format? And it's as simple as this. So let's just say our data is list tasks.values. So if you notice, we don't actually want these guys. We only want these guys because this is just redundant. This is simply just helping us query stuff. So this will give us all the values in this dictionary and make them into a list. So now that that is in list format, we can have our response be, so success, and this is true, and then our data is our data there, and then that's going to be our response. But as you may recall, we want to make this a JSON, so we do return json.dumps response, and we also want to turn a response code. So 200 means it's successful. 201 means you successfully created something. Like, for example, if someone wants to make a task, and as you all may know, 400 or 404 is error codes. This is so the clients can know, even if they don't really know your response, they'll know, okay, this is a good response. Okay, now we can already try and test this out. So let's run our server, just python app.py. And if we go to Safari, where's Safari? Right here. We can, so if we hit this again, it's still hello world. We didn't change that. We can hit task. So remember, you need a trailing backslash. Great. So we return this, and that's exactly what we should expect because we have 2 tasks in our database. Awesome. Okay. Now, the next endpoint that I want to make is to allow people to create tasks. So this is how you would do that. So if you recall in lecture, there's different types of requests. There's get and post. So get, the client doesn't send any JSON payload, but for a post they do. So we need to parse that. And I will show you how. Okay. So one other thing in Python is that if you name a global variable and you want to reference that global variable, how do you differentiate that global variable with just like a local variable? Like if I just did task counter plus equals 1, this would literally just create a completely new variable that just so happens to be named task ID counter. So I need to declare that this task ID counter matches this one. And the way that you do that is just global task ID counter. Again, hopefully if you pass the pretest, you know this, but I'm just gonna say, like, restate some things just in case. So you can always watch my video on 2x speed. Okay, so let's parse the client request body. So that's json.loads request.data. So this is the library that we imported from before, and basically it's how you can recognize the requests that basically the clients are giving you, and within that request, it's the data that you want to, create the task out of. So like what the description is, whether or not the task is done. So let's actually try and get that stuff. So the description, you can get that just by this. So body.get description. Okay. So just as a side note, you can access values in dictionaries with this syntax. But if the client doesn't send you a description, like they don't send you a JSON with a key description, your code will throw an error. So it's better to, be graceful about your errors. So in the past, we would just, demo with this, but it's much better if you guys do this. So hopefully you guys will follow this, and then no more Piazza questions about this. Okay. Now, that's actually all we need to create a task. We're not going to allow people to say whether or not they're done with a task, because when you first create a task, it's not really done, right? So we're just going to always assume that done is false. So let's create our task. So we're just going to follow our format here. So there's going to be an ID, description, and done. Okay, so our ID is the next ID. So that's the counter that we were keeping track of, and the description is whatever the client sent us. So that's description, and then done is of course false. Okay, so now that we've set this new ID counter, we need to increment it for the next for the next task that comes along. So that's just plus equals 1. Now we want to return a response. So that's JSON dumps success is true and data is the task that we want to give. And I don't need to do list or whatever, because this is already just like a dictionary. And whenever I pass dictionaries into this JSON dumps, the whole thing becomes a JSON. So that's all we need. And like I said before, the success code is 201 because we successfully created something. So note the nuance between 200 and 201. We're not going to be that strict in our test cases for your assignments, but it's just a good thing to know about. Okay, so we can test this. Okay, but how do we test this in Safari? Like, how do I make a post request? And so that's why we have something called Postman. So hopefully you guys installed this. It's gonna be your lifesaver. In the past semester, when I taught the course, some people would be like halfway done and then ask me like, oh, I never knew how to use Postman. That's very unfortunate. So I will show you guys how to use Postman. Alright, so I can't zoom in because some people have requested to see my lovely face down here, so this can't be full screen if you want to see my face. But here is Postman. So it's basically a way for you to make API requests and look at your responses in a nice JSON format, whatever, in ways that you can't do in a regular browser. So let's just create a clean slate. So this might be overwhelming, but just ignore that, and I will make my Postman clean like yours. Okay, so let's try and hit our endpoint that we hit in Safari. So this is just tasks. So let's go to Postman, and then this is a GET request. So if I send, great, I get what I got in Safari. So that's what I expect. one thing I love doing is creating collections so that, you know, I can keep track of stuff and I don't have to keep trying to go through my tabs and find which endpoint this was in. So here, just create a collection, click save, and then this is just like get all tasks, and then I can add this to my collection, save to demo. And then as you notice, like I already have some stuff from last semester, but here I can just click on it and then I can click send and it's beautiful. Okay, so let's try creating a task. So let's duplicate this one, and this will be create a task, enter. Okay, so if we look back at our code, it's at the same endpoint, except it's a post request. So let's switch this to post. And now we are expecting the client to give us a JSON request body with just the key description and the description of the task. So pay very close attention to this. Okay, so post request is you click on body, click on raw, JSON, and then now you can type stuff. And make sure you type actual JSON format, because then the request won't send or won't go through. Okay, so description. Let's say finish my algo piece set, which I have not done yet, which is unfortunate, but yeah, that's a task that I have. So let's send. Great, so I return a success is true. Description is finish my algo piece set, great, and this is false. Okay, let's say I didn't pass this in, or I just like misspelled this actually. So Postman will give me an error, 404 not found, which is great. And we can also check here in our terminal and see that, yeah, we tried to hit an endpoint that didn't exist, so that's why it's 404. So if you guys ever get that error when you're trying to do your assignments, you're probably entering the URL wrong here, or you're not doing a raw JSON body, or you didn't have the trailing slash. I swear, the trailing slash gets everybody. Yeah, so make sure you do that. Okay, so now that we've created a task, let's say I just want to get a single task. So I don't want to get all the tasks, I just want to get one task and buy the ID. So this is a GET request, but with something called URL parameter. So let me first type this and then I will explain. Okay, so if you guys noticed, if I don't have methods, it's just automatically assumed that my endpoint is a GET request, which is great. We don't have to be wordy here. So we can assume that this is a GET request. Okay, so what is this? All right, so this is specific syntax that you have to follow for a URL parameter, a URL path parameter. So 3 things that you should remember. 1, a post request JSON body. 2, a GET parameter. And 3, a URL path parameter. So a GET parameter is something that you would pass in, like, for example, you are logged into Facebook and you want to click on a profile and that leads you to another tab in your browser. Facebook needs to recognize who you are, and so when your browser makes requests to Facebook servers, you'll be sending in like whatever your cookie into whatever you called a header. And you can also send in stuff via Params, and this is where you can add stuff. So let's say I want to create a task here, so I would just like, if I do this, blah, 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 it will add my URL parameter here. So it can get quite confusing, but there's only 2 things that we're going to deal with in this course, which is making sure that you have the post request and then making sure that you have the URL path parameter. So how this would look like in Safari, for example, because it's just a GET, supposedly I can get the task ID like this. Sorry, it's just kind of tiny, but so there's no response here because we didn't implement it yet, but that's what we're trying to expect. Okay, so let's go back to this and actually get our tasks. So let's first get our task, and that's just querying our Python dictionary. So ID. You could also just do this. Task ID, because this is just like dictionary syntax, but we do this so that you can gracefully catch your errors or whatever, and that's what I will be doing now. So if there's no task that exists with that ID, I'm going to return a error response. So success, this is where the success thing comes in handy. False, and then error, task not found. Oops, task not found. And then I'm just going to return, I think 404 will be appropriate for that. Okay, so a question that might come up is, okay, why do we even need success, true, false, if we can just determine from data an error? It's because the clients don't always know what key to expect. So if you guarantee them that, okay, I'm always going to send this key success, then they're going to check for it and be like, okay, if success is true, then I'll know the key data will exist. Otherwise, I'm going to check if there's an error and see what's going wrong. Okay, otherwise, if there is a task, I want to return the actual task in a successful JSON response. Okay. And this is a 200. Okay, great. We can test this later. Let's continue with updating a task. Actually, this is pretty easy, so we can just do this now. Great. So I'm alternating between Safari and Postman, but you really should just only be using Postman. So let's just do this. Okay, so basically what I wanted to clarify again from earlier, I don't think I explained this well enough, but URL path parameters is like you don't have key and values here. So that's just 0. So if this was actually a query parameter, I would say, okay, ID is 0. So Postman nicely helps me do that, but I'm not doing a query parameter. I'm just doing a path parameter. So I should just enter in the ID and it will recognize that. Okay, so let's create, so just pretend I'm creating a new endpoint. I'm kind of lazy, so let's just do this and make sure this is tasks, and then send, and then great, we have a response back. Okay, another thing that I didn't really mention was, so this has to match exactly with whatever parameter you're passing into your function. This is what allows Flask to recognize, okay, whatever the client put in the URL path parameter, I want to pass this into my function and actually use it. So that's why when I gave the 0 at the end here, which is the ID of the task, I recognize that, okay, that's actually the task I want, which is this 0. Okay. Also, another question that arises, why do we repeat this ID here? That's because when we return to the client, we also want to include the ID so that they can, okay, so this is ID 0, so I can make another request and get the specifics of task 0. So it's just to make our response a lot easier. Yep, okay. So now that we're able to get a task, let's update a task. Okay, so that's app.route, tasks, int, task ID, and then this will be a post, because if we want to update a task, we have to pass in the stuff we want to edit. Update task ID. Okay, so this is pretty similar to getting a task, because we have to get the task first before we can update it. So this is the same thing, and we can actually just copy this. Okay, and then now we have to parse the body that the client sends. Okay, so now that we're able to get the task, let's actually update it. So how you update a value in a dictionary is first you get the key that you want to update it in, and then you just assign it to that key. So the body, you get the description, and then you update that, and then whether or not you finish, now you can actually update it. So this is body.get done. Okay, return a success, true, data, task. Okay. So now I can update a task. Let's test this in Postman. All right, so we can maybe duplicate this, and this will be a post, and I want to update the 0th task, and then let's actually first get all the tasks, just to see if this is fine. Okay, so let's update laundry to do algo pset again. just cause. Okay, so how we're gonna do this is go to body, raw, JSON, and then we have to update our description, and then say do algo pset, and then we update the done, and let's just pretend I finished it. Okay. Great, so let's post this. I think this will work. Great, so this returned a success response. Also, another thing that I didn't mention was that you can make this look really pretty. So you can do like pretty, raw, preview, visualize. Pretty is the best because you can set JSON and it'll like format it for you. So highly recommend that. You can also click here to copy stuff. Oops, I'll like move my face. Yeah, you can copy stuff there. You can also like, oops, there's like stuff on my face. Okay. You can also like save your response, whatever, as a file, whatever you want. And it's great here that Postman shows you that stuff was 200 okay and other statistic stuff that you can see if your endpoint is running well. But if you give something like a bad, I don't know, like a bad URL, for example, you didn't have a trailing slash, then you will have this error. Also, this thing is like, okay, very good. You can see my wonderful face. Okay. Yeah, so notice that the trailing slash matters a lot, and our error that the task does not exist is here, so that's great. So things are working well. Let's go back to our code, and instead of updating a task, let's add functionality to delete a task. So I think we can do the same thing here actually. And instead of post, let's do delete. Side fun fact is we also grade on Python style in your homework because it's good practice. So make sure you're using double quotes instead of single quotes. Actually might dock off points on that. So yeah. Okay, so one thing that I didn't mention was how this get function can also take default values. So if you don't recognize the task ID, so if there's no task ID, we can just have this function return none. So if there's no task ID, task would just be none. We're not going to have an error or anything like that. But the thing is, if you don't do this, it will by default return none. So like if you say like by default I want my task ID to be 0 if I don't find one, then you can do that. But this is redundant, so you can just delete that. Okay, so if there's no task to delete, then I'm still going to want to say no task found. Otherwise, I want to delete stuff. So this is regular Python dictionary syntax when you want to delete a key from your dictionary. Okay, and then I just want to return the task that I successfully deleted, so the client knows, okay, yeah, I deleted that task. That was the right one I wanted to delete. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, I've been keeping my server running. If I like do some random like indent thing and I try to save, my server will just crash. So this, just keep note of this when you're trying to test stuff in Postman and you're like, oh my god, none of my endpoints work. Okay, go to your terminal and check if your server is still running. Chances are it's probably not because you have some error. Okay, so I'm running my server. Let's try to delete our task. So let's go to Postman. So this is like another thing you can't do in Safari, make delete requests. So let's try to get our task. So get our task 0. Instead of getting it, let's delete it. Okay, delete, send. And this is the correct task I wanted to delete. And let's get all of our tasks. And the task with ID 0 has been deleted. So we only have this now, which is wonderful. Okay, so that concludes all of demo 1. Hopefully this was helpful enough. One thing that I want to mention is that we will not be releasing our demo code, so too bad. You guys will have to copy and follow along with me in the video. Yeah, so if you do end up copying the demo code and you use it as a reference for your assignment, which I highly recommend, please do not post this on GitHub or anything like that. You can do a private repository. GitHub now allows that. You can also do on your own Cornell GitHub. But yes, please don't post this because we recycle these every single semester. The same goes with your assignments. All right, so your assignment will probably be released sometime on Monday or whatever day you're watching this. Hopefully, I have released it by then. Um, you can download the code, I believe, on CMS, and that's also where you will be submitting and getting grades from. And office hours, I mentioned in my welcome post that we're still deciding that, but my office hours will definitely be on Friday, so you can stop by and complain to me about life or ask me about CS courses and stuff like that. Does not feel like I'm a junior, but if you guys come, maybe I'll feel more mature about it. So, yeah, just you guys should take advantage of this course. It's super helpful. I know this is only demo 1, but I would say this is probably one of the most important classes I took at Cornell. Probably one of the only actually practical useful ones, because the CS classes at Cornell are so theoretical. So yeah, if you ever have questions about that, don't be afraid to ask. And with that, I'll say good luck on your first assignment. Bye.